After the official rules for Elestrals dropped a few weeks back, I've been debating making a video about my initial impressions on it, but was kind of held back because I felt like whenever I tried to film it or even think about what I would say, it got very rambly and no focus, and I just was kind of left wondering, why would anyone actually care about my thoughts? But after some discussion in the Discord and me making a reference to how uh, trying out Elestrals really changed my perspective on my thoughts of Yu-Gi-Oh! I was actually asked a question from Reaper's War in the Elestrals Discord to kind of elaborate on that, more specifically about what I didn't like about Yu-Gi-Oh! I'll kind of show the Discord messages up on the screen here that transpired, but that kind of just encouraged me to finally make this video. I'm going to try my best not to be rambly and just kind of stick to the main points, as I don't want this to be too long. Also, there'll either be some gameplay footage up here, or it'll just be my webcam. I haven't decided yet which one I want to use, and if it's just the webcam, you can always just tune out and listen to it and multitask with whatever. So just for a brief background, Yu-Gi-Oh! Was my main game for the longest time from when I was in elementary into middle school, because I really liked the anime. The cards were easy to get. I enjoyed playing it more with my brother than the other easily accessible games such as Pokemon and Magic. Well, I was a bit too young for Magic anyway, so it was mainly Pokemon. And of course, anyone who's played Yu-Gi-Oh!, especially as a child, knows how fun schoolyard Yu-Gi-Oh! Can be. It's a very different experience. But as I kind of broke away from more schoolyard Yu-Gi-Oh! To actually properly learning the rules and the meta of the game, I slowly became less interested in it. Because actual Yu-Gi-Oh! Doesn't lend itself very well to what I was wanting to get out of Yu-Gi-Oh! What you really want to as a child, and that's to be able to summon all the cool boss monsters you get. For me, it was especially the ones from the anime, like Majestic Star Dragon, Shooting Star Dragon, all the Utopias from Zexal. I want to, in a game, be able to bring them all out and use them just like I saw in the anime as a really cool, almost toolbox of different forms you can go into. But the reality of the game was not that at all. And through also not really liking how the game was especially turning to more of a game where you tried to stop your opponent from being able to make their plays, that was what the interaction was becoming when I finally stopped Yu-Gi-Oh! Back in the Pendulum era. It left me thinking I just didn't like how the rules of Yu-Gi-Oh! Were set up. That specifically being where the resource system was only the number of cards in hand and your life points. I just thought that led to a very imbalanced gameplay because Yu-Gi-Oh! Was the only game like that I had actually played. And because of those factors, I was actually, and I should back up, those factors and that child in me wanting to play those awesome bosses that I saw in the anime, I was actually drawn towards another TCG, that being Cardfight Vanguard. Since your main boss card that you can see in the anime, or even ones that aren't in the anime, is actually protected based on the rules of the game. I mean, you're literally that card. It's the centerpiece of your deck. Your opponent, under most circumstances, can't get rid of it. So I was actually drawn into that game because of it, and ended up falling in love, and it's still my main TCG to this day. But kind of getting that context out of the way, when I actually found out the rules of Elestrals through watching that video, I can't remember if it was the day it was released, I think it was, and seeing how much it was like Yu-Gi-Oh!, I actually instantly thought that this would be a game that I would enjoy trying, but would never stick with in the long term, just because I associated my dislike's a strong word, I came to accept Yu-Gi-Oh! For what it was, but more so the reason why I didn't play Yu-Gi-Oh! Long term, I associated with a lot of the mechanics that Elestrals also uses. Though, at the same time, as I had started to hate Yu-Gi-Oh! Less and accepted it for what it was and that it wasn't something for me, it let me come into Elestrals with a fresh mindset, thankfully, and set, I think, more realistic expectations of what the card game would be like. That being said, though, that wasn't the reality of what Elestrals actually is. For starters, I am very pleasantly surprised how much the resource system changes the balance of the game entirely away from Yu-Gi-Oh! Just having that extra resource system really changes, I shouldn't say necessarily how the game is played per se, as a lot of the same strategies and I'm trying to think of a good encompassing word for it. But I think a lot of the important things you need to think about while playing this game is the same as Yu-Gi-Oh! Due to Yu-Gi-Oh! And Elestrals sharing a lot of the same inherent mechanics. But through Elestrals, I actually started to realize that what I actually wasn't as fond of in Yu-Gi-Oh! Wasn't a lot of what I thought it was. For example, the only one normal summon per turn or one normal enchant. I thought that was a huge thing I didn't like. I just wanted to be able to play out cards, not have that limit. And Vanguard pretty much lets you do that. But it turns out that really wasn't the issue for me. And it was the same thing for realizing this sort of back and forth. That being because in Yu-Gi-Oh! There's only one normal summon per turn. And this is less new Yu-Gi-Oh! More old Yu-Gi-Oh! And how Schoolyard Yu-Gi-Oh! Ended up being. It was more of a matter of that trade. Can you attack over your opponent's monster? Do you have a spell or trap card that answers it so you end up with more presence on the board, the control of the board? I thought a lot of that kind of back and forth gameplay of almost how I viewed it was, do you have an out to my play? Or do you have an out to me being ahead on the board in monsters? I thought I didn't like that exchange as much, but turns out I don't mind that as much. I just had that confused because I got so engrossed in Vanguard not really having that kind of card exchange and its interactivity being very different, which I don't want to get into too much in this video. I can definitely do a breakdown of why I love Vanguard, what really keeps me in Vanguard, but not important for this video. I think the important thing is that Elestrals made me realize that that sort of like back and forth and really analyzing card advantage on board and tempo on board is something that really wasn't as obvious to me in Vanguard. That is something new and different to learn, and it's been really exciting. At this point, I've only really built one custom deck, that being the Water, Earth, Wind control beatdown deck that I've been posting videos on for the past 2 weeks at the time of recording this. And I've had a lot of fun with that, and it really actually centers around on that game concept of, since you're limited to one normal enchant per turn, the control, at least celestial control, matters of not only making sure you can answer what your opponent plays out, making it harder for them to ascend into stronger cards or build out wider, but also building out wider on your own board to get a commanding presence. And I mean, that in itself taught me that rule wasn't the issue. Furthermore, that also ties into that exchange of, do you have an out each turn? Again, I thought I didn't like that about Yu-Gi-Oh! This feeling of, oh, I need to draw an out to be able to get ahead. I thought I didn't like that, and I actually don't mind that as much as I really thought I did. I think for Yu-Gi-Oh! I do mind it more based on Yu-Gi-Oh! Not having a resource system. Therefore, they really need to limit how many cards you can see in a turn, and they've also had to fall back on this gameplay of heavy negate, stopping your opponent from doing stuff. That because of the resource system, I don't foresee, and well, I should say, as long as the developers are cognizant of it, which I really think they are, I don't see Elestrals having that problem unless cards are specifically designed that way. And that's just because of the resource system being that limiter. We can actually see more cards, and as long as there is some wiggle room as card advantage is still important, but I feel like it's less important than in Yu-Gi-Oh! Just because we also have the resource system to limit us. So therefore, this idea of drawing counters, I don't think bothers me as much because card draw isn't as potent in Elestrals as, say, in Yu-Gi-Oh! Meaning they can allow more card draw to exist in the game, so you can more readily see your outs. So it becomes less of a, did you draw your out, and more of a, did you use your outs more wisely to ultimately lead you to a victory. And I think that's the most important thing, coupled with the fact that so far every single card has an effect, So it isn't just a numbers game. It's how effectively are you using your numbers on top of your effects to get you a victory. And that to me is way more interesting. And that's actually another reason what drew me to Vanguard is this idea of the effects dictating the game a lot more than that raw numbers on the card. Like they still do, but it was more being able to strike a balance between the two as opposed to it just being a numbers game. To me, is just way more interesting. And thankfully, Elestrals is looking to be more like that than, say, old Yu-Gi-Oh! Used to be. Old Yu-Gi-Oh! Was just mostly a numbers game, and again, who drew the outs, but not Elestrals at all. So I guess to summarize my points here, of things I really were surprised and I recognize I actually really like about Elestrals is every single card having a card effect that contributes something to the game. So it's a balance between the effects of the cards and the numbers on them, as well as your winning strategy utilizing those numbers and effects to get you that victory. That I definitely really like. I also like that more card draw can exist in the game without it being broken. That means that you are going to see more cards, more outs, and it's less so do you see them and more so how effectively are you using them. And I also think, third of all, the resource system is just the MVP here for allowing all this and adding actually another very interesting dimension into the game because you really need to be thinking about your spirit exchange in most cases because one of the things that you can get punished for is if you commit too much spirits, which can allow cool plays like your opponent being able to hit over like Exaltair's ability. And just in general, just think of spirit exchanges. Are these spirits I'm giving up worthwhile to try to close out the game, or am I committing too much and could get really punished for it? So I think I'm getting into more rambly territory at this point, but I think I summarized my points very well about why I actually like Elestrals. And I hope at this point I made it pretty obvious what in Yu-Gi-Oh! Those tied to that I don't mind. I think the final point, just to summarize, is just I would say what I don't like about Yu-Gi-Oh! Right now and why I don't actively play it, other than the price point, of course, but is the interaction in the game is stopping from your opponent from playing the game. I don't think that's fun. And I don't get that from Elestrals. I've kind of come into the mindset of the game is put your opponent into a checkmate. So of course you're going to end that with even just leaving them with no spirits so they can't play anything. Technically you're saying, oh, well, you can't play the game. But that's the whole goal of the game. As opposed to Yu-Gi-Oh! Just honestly just boiling it down to the negates, the floodgates, or the hard floodgates, like you can't play cards, you can't play spell and trap cards, no effects. That sort of stuff, not my cup of tea, but that in the form that they are in Elestrals, I do actually enjoy. The strategies are more interesting. I guess the only other thing I could really say about what I didn't like about Yu-Gi-Oh! Was also the numbers game, as it felt like you were a lot more reliant on numbers than card effects per se at times. When I joined, it was a bit muddy, but definitely still didn't like that when I was playing more schoolyard Yu-Gi-Oh! With my brother and such. And I'm thankful that Elestrals doesn't fall into that same pitfall. I actually found a good way to summarize it. I think what I'm trying to say here is I like the interactivity that exists in the Elestrals prototype format so far, while I'm not haven't been a big fan about how Yu-Gi-Oh!'s interactivity is from what I remember playing it as a child to what I see it being now. Needless to say, despite all my biases kind of going into Elestrals, I am really glad I gave it a fair shot because I am having a blast with it. The community's great, and just I have deck ideas I want to test that it feels exciting to be able to come home from work and just say, I really want to try to build this deck, or I really want to test that deck. I really want to see if my idea works. So all in all, I'm glad I was proven wrong about my initial reservations about the game. But that's enough rambling from me for now. Probably will have ample more opportunity to ramble as I discuss more on the Discord, possibly hop into some discussion videos with other YouTubers. So I'm sure you'll hear more of my thoughts. But of course, if I'd like to actually hear your own thoughts. If you're a fellow former or current Yu-Gi-Oh player, I would like to hear your thoughts and how you've been comparing Elestrals to Yu-Gi-Oh! And if maybe you felt some of the same things as me, or even had some different observations. And if you're interested in actually hearing more about my TCG experience, as well as possibly hearing the story about how I fully transitioned from Yu-Gi-Oh! To Cardfight Vanguard, I am definitely happy to share. And I really just need to know if this is something that would interest you all as the audience. Also, look forward to the Elestrals content I have coming up. I've actually had a ton of ideas that I've been pondering and actually discussing with other people on Discord. So I can promise you that as long as I'm still enjoying making content, I've got plenty of ideas for the future that I hope you all will actually end up enjoying.